The train screeched to a halt, jolting me awake. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum solo in the quiet carriage. Disoriented, I fumbled for my phone, the screen blindingly bright in the dim morning light. One unread message glared back at me. John knows. Coming home early. Be careful. Blood drained from my face. Sarah's message was a bomb, the fuse already lit. Panic choked me. 5 years of marriage, meticulously constructed normalcy, threatened to crumble in a heartbeat. My eyes darted around the emptying carriage. John? Was he? The train door hissed open. A wave of nausea washed over me. I had to get off, disappear, buy time. Shoving past the throng of morning commuters, I stumbled onto the platform. The city, once a familiar landscape, felt alien, every face a potential threat. Where are you going? A voice cut through the chaos. I froze. It couldn't be. John stood there, a bewildered frown creasing his brow. His hand instinctively reached for his briefcase, then dropped back to his side. John. My voice came out a hoarse whisper. My mind raced, scrambling for a lie, any lie. I forgot something at the office. It sounded weak, pathetic, even to my own ears. He stared at me, his blue eyes searching mine. I braced myself for the explosion, the accusations, the years of resentment finally surfacing. Instead, he simply sighed, a deep, weary sound. Get in the car, he said, his voice flat. The lack of anger chilled me more than any outburst could have. This wasn't the John the first knew, the predictable, easygoing John. This was a stranger, his eyes filled with a cold, steely glint. As I climbed into the passenger seat, the silence in the car was deafening. My phone buzzed again, another message from Sarah. I didn't dare look. The damage was done. John knew. But how much did he know? And more importantly, what did he intend to do? The shrill ring of the doorbell shattered the fragile peace of the evening. John glanced at me, a questioning look in his eyes. We'd been eating takeout in a tense silence, the air thick with the unspoken aftermath of the morning's train station encounter. Expecting someone? He asked, his voice neutral. My stomach lurched. No, absolutely not. Panic clawed at my throat. This couldn't be happening. Not now. I forced a smile. Probably a wrong apartment, I mumbled, already reaching for the door. John was faster. He beat me to it, pulling the door open a crack. A woman stood there, a confused frown etched on her face. She was young, stylishly dressed, holding a bouquet of lilies. The very same lilies John had surprised me with just a week ago. The blood drained from my face. John? The woman started, her voice laced with surprise. Then, her eyes flicked to me, a flicker of recognition dawning. Oh, she breathed, her hand flying to her mouth. John's grip tightened on the doorknob, his knuckles turning white. The silence stretched, suffocating and heavy. I wanted to crawl under the rug, to vanish into thin air. Every stolen lunch break, every whispered phone call, every lie, seemed to coalesce into this single, damning moment. Who was she, John? The woman finally managed, her voice trembling. John didn't answer. He just stared at me, his gaze a cold blue fire. Betrayal, raw and naked, flickered in his eyes. It was a look I'd never seen before, a look that terrified me to my core. The carefully constructed facade of our marriage, the years of comfortable routine, crumbled around me like dust. My voice cracked. Words failed me. There were no excuses, no justifications. The truth, ugly and undeniable, hung heavy in the air. The woman, her eyes wide with shock and hurt, took a step back. I see, she whispered, her voice thick with tears. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away, the clatter of her retreating heels echoing in the deafening silence. John closed the door with a soft thud, the sound like a death knell. He turned to me, his face a mask of suppressed fury. What do you have to say for yourself? He rasped, his voice barely a whisper. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. The weight of my actions, the enormity of my betrayal, pressed down on me with crushing force. In that moment, staring into John's cold, unforgiving eyes, I knew the life I'd taken for granted was irrevocably shattered. The question wasn't what I had to say, but how I could possibly pick up the pieces of this mess I'd created. The insistent buzz of John's phone on the nightstand sliced through my sleep. Panic jolted me awake. It was late, past 2 a.m. Why was his phone ringing? He usually kept it on silent at night. Curiosity gnawed at me, a bitter aftertaste in my mouth. John mumbled something incoherent and reached for the phone. But before he could answer, a name flashed on the screen. A name that sent a jolt of ice through me. Sarah. My breath caught in my throat. The blood drained from my face. My carefully constructed world teetered on the brink of collapse. John fumbled with the phone, his voice thick with sleep. Hello? He mumbled. I held my breath, straining to hear the conversation on the other end. John? It's Sarah, the voice said, clear and distinct. Listen. I know this is crazy, but I think I left my scarf at your place last week. Any chance you could check? John's mumbled response was unintelligible. He glanced at me, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. Then, his gaze sharpened, a spark of awareness igniting in his sleepy face. Hold on a sec, he said, turning towards me. His voice was low, dangerous. Did you lose a scarf at my place recently? My mind raced. Deny it? Lie some more? The truth, a monstrous beast, clawed its way up my throat. Silence stretched between us, thick with unspoken accusations. John, I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. He didn't wait for an answer. He turned back to the phone, his voice tight. Look, Sarah, he said, each word clipped and measured. There must be some mistake. We haven't seen each other in years. The lie hung heavy in the air, a suffocating weight. John's words were a slap in the face, a brutal reminder of the web of deceit I'd woven. On the other end of the line, Sarah's confused reply was cut short by John abruptly ending the call. He stared at me, his eyes burning with a cold fury I'd never seen before. The accusations hung unspoken, but the message was clear. He knew. The thrill of the affair, the excitement of living a double life, evaporated, leaving behind a chilling emptiness. Care to explain? He finally said, his voice a low growl. The question hung in the air, a death knell for the life I'd taken for granted. Years of carefully constructed normalcy, of comfortable routine, crumbled around me in that single, devastating moment. There was no turning back. The truth, however ugly, had to be faced. But as I met John's icy gaze, a new fear gripped me. How much did he know? And more importantly, what was he going to do next? My stomach lurched as John's hand hovered over his laptop keyboard. He'd been staring at the screen for an agonizingly long time, his brow furrowed in concentration. Fear, cold and sharp, pricked at my skin. What are you doing? I blurted out, the question louder than intended in the quiet living room. John flinched, startled. He glanced at me briefly, then quickly minimized the window he was working on. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum solo drowning out the silence. Just some work stuff, he mumbled, his voice strained. Nothing important. Work stuff on a Saturday night? I pressed, suspicion gnawing at me. John never worked weekends, especially not on his personal laptop. He hesitated, then sighed, a deep breath that seemed to deflate him. Look, he started, his voice flat. There's something I need to show you. With a click, the minimized window reappeared, revealing a horrifying sight, my email inbox. My blood ran cold. How? When? John wasn't tech-savvy, and I'd meticulously deleted every incriminating message with Sarah. Panic choked me. John, My voice cracked. There were dozens of emails, all addressed to or from Sarah, blatantly discussing our affair. Dates, times, stolen moments, it was all laid bare, my carefully crafted web of lies exposed in its entirety. Where did you? I stammered, my mind racing for an explanation, any explanation. John cut me off, his voice laced with a barely contained fury. Don't bother, Lisa. I hired someone. A professional. The weight of his words slammed into me. He hadn't just suspected, he'd taken action, a calculated move that spoke volumes about his simmering anger. Shame burned in my cheeks, a searing heat that threatened to consume me. There were no excuses, no justifications. John scrolled through the emails, his expression a mask of cold indifference. Each click seemed to be a hammer blow, shattering the fragile illusion of our marriage. So, this is the more excitement you needed, he finally said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. The years of unspoken resentment, the frustration I'd ignored, all bubbled to the surface in that single question. Tears welled up in my eyes, blurring my vision. But before I could speak, a new notification popped up on the screen, an email from Sarah, unread. John's gaze snapped to it, a flicker of something akin to pain crossing his face for a fleeting moment. He clicked on the email. I held my breath, waiting for the inevitable explosion. But instead of anger, a grim silence descended. John read the email, his face unreadable. Then, he closed the laptop with a snap, the sound echoing in the deafening quiet. "Get some sleep, Lisa," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. The dismissal was worse than any outburst. I retreated to the bedroom, feeling utterly defeated. The revelation of the affair was just the beginning. Now, I had to face the consequences, the potential destruction of the life I'd taken for granted, all for a fleeting thrill that now left a bitter taste in my mouth. The lilies lay sprawled on the kitchen counter, their vibrant color a stark contrast to the leaden weight in my stomach. John's words echoed in my head. "There's someone. Someone new." My carefully constructed world, already teetering on the brink, crumbled completely. The irony was suffocating. Months of stolen moments, a desperate search for excitement, and all it had brought me was a chasm between John and me. And now, he was moving on. Desperation fueled a reckless question. "Who?" I blurted out, my voice barely above a whisper. John, humming as he unpacked groceries, paused and looked at me. A flicker of something, maybe pity, crossed his face. "Her name's Jessica," he said, a casual smile gracing his lips. "We met at that new client reception last month. Seems we have a lot in common." My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum solo in the deafening silence. Jessica. A new name, a new face, a new beginning for John. And me? I was left with the wreckage of my choices. "Oh," I managed, the single syllable a pathetic response to the life-altering news. John didn't seem to notice my choked tone. He continued unpacking, his earlier tension replaced by a newfound lightness. The sight of him, carefree and happy, was a cruel twist of the knife. This was the John I'd taken for granted, the John I'd pushed away in my selfish pursuit of a thrill. And now, he was moving on, leaving me behind in the ruins. Shame burned in my cheeks, a searing heat that threatened to consume me. Every stolen glance, every whispered lie, came crashing back in a wave of regret. The excitement I'd craved had turned to ashes in my mouth, leaving only a bitter taste of betrayal and loss. Suddenly, the silence became unbearable. "John," I started, my voice trembling. "Can we talk about?" But before I could finish the question, the doorbell rang. John glanced at me, then towards the door. A strange expression flitted across his face, a flicker of something I couldn't decipher. "Probably Jessica," he said, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. He strode towards the door, leaving me suspended in a state of agonizing uncertainty. Who was at the door? Was it Sarah, coming back for some twisted closure? Or was it someone else entirely, another complication in this already tangled mess? As John opened the door, a wave of dread washed over me. The answer, whoever it was, promised to be another blow in this relentless storm of consequences. The pounding on the door escalated from insistent to frantic. I flinched, the sound grating on my already frayed nerves. John had left a few hours ago, his silence more deafening than any argument. Now, who could be here at this hour? Heaving myself off the couch, I trudged towards the door, each step heavy with a sense of dread. Peeking through the peephole, I sucked in a sharp breath. Standing on the doorstep was Sarah, her face streaked with tears, eyes red-rimmed. Panic clawed at my throat. The last person I wanted to see was a walking reminder of my infidelity. Just as I was about to ignore her, she spoke, her voice thick with emotion. "Lisa, please," she pleaded. "I need to talk to you." My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum solo against the quiet hallway. Opening the door a crack, I stammered, "Sarah, what are you doing here?" "It's John," she blurted, tears welling up again. "He came to see me. He told me everything." My breath caught in my throat. John? Here? With Sarah? The world seemed to tilt on its axis. This wasn't supposed to happen. She was supposed to be the one who moved on, not John. "What do you mean?" I managed, my voice barely a whisper. Sarah stepped forward, desperation etched on her face. "He said he needed to clear his head," she choked out. He said he still had feelings for me." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. John, the one who'd seemed so eager to move on with Jessica, still cared about Sarah? The woman I'd betrayed him for? A bitter laugh escaped my lips, a harsh, humorless sound. "So much for your new girlfriend," I said, the words laced with a venom I didn't recognize. Sarah flinched, her eyes widening in surprise. "Girlfriend?" she stammered. "What girlfriend?" Confusion clouded my face. "Jessica," I said, bewildered. The woman you met at the work function, John said. The realization dawned on me, slow and sickening. John hadn't mentioned Jessica to Sarah. He hadn't moved on at all. The supposed new girlfriend was a lie. A cold dread seeped into my bones. If John hadn't moved on, what did his visit to Sarah mean? Was it a desperate attempt to rekindle their old flame? Or something more sinister? The possibilities swirled in my mind, each one more terrifying than the last. Lisa, Sarah pressed, her voice pleading. Please tell me what's going on. Why did John lie? I stared at her, the truth a bitter pill on my tongue. But before I could answer, a new wave of panic washed over me. If John hadn't moved on, then where was he now? And why hadn't he come home? The sterile air of the courtroom pressed down on me, suffocating. John sat across the aisle, a stranger in a familiar suit. His eyes, usually a warm blue, were cold and distant. Shame burned in my cheeks, a constant companion these past few weeks. The judge, a stern woman with steely gray hair, addressed me. Mrs. Larson, do you contest the grounds for divorce? My throat tightened. No, Your Honor, I croaked, the words scraping against my raw voice. John's lawyer, a shark in a pinstripe suit, stepped forward. Excellent. Then, for the record, Mrs. Larson admits to infidelity throughout the marriage, correct? My stomach lurched. Infidelity. The word hung in the air, a damning indictment. I wanted to scream, to deny, to somehow rewind time and erase the past year. But the evidence, John's meticulously recovered messages, lay on the table, a silent testament to my betrayal. Yes, I whispered, the single word a surrender. The lawyer nodded curtly, then launched into a detailed presentation. Dates, times, stolen moments, my carefully constructed web of lies laid bare. With each incriminating email displayed, John's face remained impassive, a mask of indifference that chilled me to the bone. But then, something unexpected happened. As the lawyer reached for the final email, a message from Sarah sent the day John left, a flicker of emotion crossed John's face. It was a fleeting expression, a mix of surprise and, maybe anger? Before I could decipher it, the lawyer continued, his voice droning on about emotional cruelty and marital misconduct. The rest of the hearing blurred into a monotonous drone. The judge's final decree hammered home the reality: my marriage was over. John received the house, a fair settlement, and a clean break. I walked out of the courtroom with nothing but the clothes on my back and the crushing weight of regret. Back in the empty apartment, the silence echoed my loneliness. Picking up my phone, I dialed Sarah's number, a desperate plea for something. Understanding? Forgiveness? Maybe just a shred of explanation. The phone rang once, twice, then went to voicemail. Hi, this is Sarah. Leave a message and I'll get back to you. The polite greeting did little to soothe the storm raging inside me. John's reaction to Sarah's email, that fleeting flicker of emotion, gnawed at me. What did it mean? Had he lied about seeing her? Was there something more to the story? Or was it just another layer of pain, a final twist of the knife in this already mangled mess? The questions swirled in my head, unanswered and agonizing. The truth, the one thing I craved most, remained frustratingly out of reach. All I was left with were the ashes of my choices, a stark reminder of the life I destroyed and the consequences I now had to face, alone. The knock on the door shattered the suffocating silence of the apartment. I flinched, startled from a restless sleep on the worn-out sofa. It was late, past 10 p.m., and unexpected visitors were a rarity in my new, isolated life. Wiping the sleep from my eyes, I trudged towards the door, a knot of apprehension tightening in my stomach. Peeking through the peephole, my breath caught in my throat. Standing on the doorstep was John. John, the man I'd betrayed, the man whose life I'd shattered. The sight of him, unexpected and unwelcome, sent a wave of conflicting emotions crashing over me, a cocktail of anger, guilt, and a sliver of something akin to longing. He looked different, leaner, perhaps, and his eyes, usually a warm blue, held a guarded expression I didn't recognize. He wasn't alone. A woman stood beside him, her hand tucked in his arm. She was pretty, with a warm smile and a kind face. My stomach lurched. Jessica, the woman he'd supposedly moved on with so quickly. Hesitantly, I unlocked the door. John's gaze met mine, a flicker of something, regret? Remorse? Crossing his face for a fleeting moment. Before I could decipher it, he spoke. Lisa, he started, his voice strained. This is Sarah. My world tilted on its axis. Sarah. The woman I'd betrayed John for. The woman who'd supposedly moved on with someone else. What were they doing here, together, at this late hour? John. I stammered, my mind racing to grasp the situation. John cut me off, his voice firm. We need to talk, he said, his gaze flickering between me and the bewildered Sarah. There's something you need to know. The weight of his words hung heavy in the air, a promise of yet another revelation. My heart pounded against my ribs, a frantic drum solo in the tense silence. What did John have to tell me? And more importantly, why did he need Sarah here to be his witness? The unanswered questions swirled in my head, a storm brewing just beneath the surface. After a beat of hesitation, I stepped back, wordlessly inviting them in. The small apartment, once a haven of familiarity, now felt suffocatingly small, the air thick with unspoken